Thank you for tuning into the All Funds Investment Podcast. Today's episode features Kevin Cott. Kevin is a partner at Cott Law Group, a boutique law firm focused on providing full service legal counsel to the investment management industry. In this episode, we discuss the recent impact of the SEC decisions on Ripple, Terraform, ETFs, and we get Kevin's outlook on SEC enforcement in the crypto space. Just a reminder here that nothing said is legal, tax, or investment advice. Check out the full disclaimer below. We hope you enjoy this conversation. Please like and subscribe if you find this information helpful, and check out the links in the description to connect with us and Kevin. It's been a handful of months now. There were issues with the SEC versus Ripple, Terraform ruling. Grayscale just had an ETF. So there's a lot happening in the crypto space. Tell us about where we're at, and you can start with whichever one you want to if you have a preference.
Yeah, it's been a really active crypto enforcement environment. A lot of moving parts. I would maybe start with the Ripple decision. So I think it was in July, Judge Torres of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York issued a summary judgment ruling regarding sales of Ripple's token, which was XRP. The key thing here was she issued a split ruling. So what she held was that direct sales of the XRP to institutional investors were a securities offering, whereas the programmatic sales to retail investors on exchanges were not a securities offering. Um, this all comes down to the application of the Howey test, and to really oversimplify it, her ruling came down to the fact that she said that programmatic sales to retail investors failed the Howey test because investors could not have known whether they were purchasing XRP from Ripple. So this ended up, making a lot of news and headway in the crypto community. I think a lot of the crypto community hailed it as this big win for the industry. Even though it had limited precedential value, it did mark like the first significant judicial pushback to the SEC's, perceived crypto regulation through enforcement. And if adopted as a framework, that would be a really big deal to basically say that, if you're trading on a secondary market and you don't know who the counterparty is, it's technically not a security. That would have, the SEC would be hamstrung in a lot of its ongoing enforcement actions, for example, Coinbase. So is this, big decision, but there were a couple issues with it. And the main one was just that the ruling was kind of surprising and I think ran counter to what you would expect, where the retail investors were the ones that weren't protected. So you fast forward a few months and there was this Terraform decision. Same court, this time a different judge, Judge Rakoff, and basically he applied the Howey test in a similar case, but came to a different result. He expressly rebuked the Ripple decision. He noted that the Howey test makes no distinction between purchasers and whether a purchaser bought the tokens directly from the issuer or in a secondary resale, and that a reasonable individual would view the issuer as having promoted the offering either way. And so what happened was it created this inconsistency. We had this Ripple decision that seemed to say that secondary sales were not securities, and then the Terraform decision that rebuked it. And so I think the Terraform decision makes more sense and is better aligned with the policy objective of protecting retail investors. That's my personal take on it. But that was kind of, I think, the first big development, which is kind of those two decisions, and trying to create this framework going forward for how do you deal with crypto tokens and deciding when they're securities. The only thing I would add to that, there's sort of this still ongoing elephant in the room, which is, they're applying the Howey test to these transaction by transaction basis. Was this a security? Was this not? There's this argument, though, that you can have something that's initially a securities offering that evolves into a utility token. That was the argument with Ethereum, for example. Bitcoin is, arguably a utility token and not a security. And I haven't seen a court address that yet. I feel like that's probably the next big thing that would actually give a lot more clarity is understanding, if that's possible and how that works. And so far, the courts haven't really taken the ball and run with it.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. I think obviously, as you mentioned, having some clarity in the courts is great, but
Yeah.
it's still, I mean, obviously you have two different situations here. It's still, in my mind, it's going to be applied on a case by case basis going forward,
Yeah.
potentially.
And the inconsistency, it kind of underscores the need for legislative clarity. Like
Right.
it's, right now, I think it's, there's really no clear framework in place. You've got, judges in the same, um, in the same district coming to totally different conclusions. It's just a really confusing subject matter that's got a lot of gray area to it.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I don't know if it's the lack of education. I know some of the of our legislators have very well entrenched expertise, and some I don't know if it's just it's a bit of both there. But it's interesting to see kind of what's happening here, and we definitely need clarity going forward. 100%.
Yeah, and there are, bills that are being proposed, but there hasn't been any traction with really,
Yeah.
real bipartisan support. Um, that's a whole different discussion about, Congress and polarization and what we can
Yeah.
expect. But um, yeah, I think a lot of people think that these decisions are kind of messy but good, because eventually maybe they lead to a judicial framework that gives you more clarity. But it's certainly a process.
Well, I think to your point earlier, you talked about Coinbase and others. It gives them at least something to point to.
Yeah.
That's been finalized going forward and may be helpful, and providing eventual clarity as to what happens when the dust settles, if you will.
It's been about 2, 3, give or take, months since the SEC versus Ripple and the Terraform ruling. Is there any updates on those? Anything that's changed or that we see could be changing since those rulings have broke?
So with Ripple, yeah, the SEC, they appealed that specific ruling and I believe it was rejected, and then they dropped their claims against Ripple's co-founders. I've seen some commentary on that. I think maybe it was more strategic, so they could kind of focus on the remainder of their claims. But that's progressing, and we'll see how it shakes out. I'm not sure what other developments have gone on with the Terraform case, if any. But I need to double check that.
Grayscale's a little bit more recent, month and a half, 2 months since this broke. Tell us about what happened with Grayscale, the
Yeah.
ETF.
So background. For years, investors wanted to have kind of exposure to Bitcoin without necessarily owning and custodying it directly. That's evolved over the years as Coinbase and other um, platforms have become more popular. But like in the early days, I think it was more of a real issue. And so Grayscale had this Grayscale Bitcoin Trust that did provide a means for that, but it was sort of this imperfect solution. It would frequently trade. It does frequently trade at a premium or a discount to the actual price of the asset. Um, and so the uh, I think the goal for a long time for a lot of these issuers was to create an ETF of spot Bitcoin that can track the price of Bitcoin. It's much more liquid, much more efficient, and there's been a lot of applications to get one approved. And the SEC has not approved one to date. So what happened was they rejected Grayscale's application to convert. I think the goal was to convert the trust to an ETF. Um, the SEC rejected it. But what's interesting is around the same time, the SEC actually approved a couple ETFs to trade Bitcoin futures. And so Grayscale sued, and the court agreed with Grayscale and found that the rejection was arbitrary and capricious, and that they didn't have a good basis for it. And so I think that the rejection was in June 2022. The court found that recently they found that the underlying assets, the Bitcoin and Bitcoin futures, are so closely correlated. Like there's these surveillance sharing agreements that are identical, and so they couldn't really understand the distinction why you would approve one and not the other. And so the DC Circuit Court of Appeals agreed, and vacated the SEC's rejection, and that kind of led us to where we are now.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I always wondered why spot wasn't approved versus futures.
Yeah.
Futures was first. As a derivative of the underlying, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, I think much was made of the Ripple decision, and that may have been sort of overhyped. This does kind of feel like more of a legitimate win for crypto. I think an ETF, that it's probably for the traders and investment managers to weigh in on how impactful that will be. But I think I think it's pretty clear that it certainly supports the industry to have that and to have another means to bring in more demand for the asset class. And while this doesn't guarantee that a spot Bitcoin ETF gets approved, it definitely increases the likelihood of it. I think like the price surged last week when Grayscale's victory was formalized in court. So, people are following this closely. It does have certainly a meaningful impact on the industry. We'll see how it shakes out. There's a lot of speculation about how the SEC is going to approach it from here. they may approve the application. They may go through the same process and take another 8 months. It could take a while. And then there's sort of like the horse racing component of it of which of these issuers is going to win and get approval. There's speculation they may approve more than one to avoid like a clear winner.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's like picking the NBA champion. We'll see.
Right now, how many have filed now? I mean, obviously you have BlackRock and a few others that are in the mix there, but there's quite a few.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I know of the BlackRock one, and I probably need to double check like how many pending applications there are, but it's certainly a race to get one approved, and I think all these really smart market participants think that there's a big opportunity there.
Sure. Well, and to be clear, spot ETFs are available worldwide, like in Canada and other places, right? It's just the U.S. is obviously has a big market.
Right, the ETPs.
Yeah.
Europe.
ETPs or ETFs in Canada. I know there's a few that are already approved.
Yeah. So it would, we'll see. I think it definitely bodes well, and looks like it's, I don't know what the percentage increase is, but some significant percentage more likely than it was before the decision.
Right. I guess we just don't know the timeline. Any speculation on that? Obviously, pure speculation on the timeline, but I don't know if it's like you said, a domino effect, a few that so they don't favor one versus the other, or probably a couple years from now, it's kind of probably just a lottery ticket.
I truly have no idea. I would guess that I would guess that more than one will be approved. It would seem unfair to approve one and not another, and I'm not sure how you would have a differing basis, even though each application is different. But I really haven't looked into that part as closely.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. Just curious.
I would imagine too, from Grayscale's perspective, if they were to convert that, from a closed-ended trust to an ETF, they'd be losing a lot in fees. I mean, not only would the, fees get compressed, but in terms of AUM, there's likely to be a large outdraw to make it trade a NAV.
Yeah. Yes, but then I also think there may be more appetite to come into it that offsets it, but I agree.
Any other thoughts, interesting developments between SEC and any other crypto company that you're seeing out there?
No, I mean, I think the backdrop to all this is probably the Coinbase and Binance lawsuits. Those are sort of the headliners. There's been certainly a lot of activity with the Coinbase one in particular. For me, as a securities attorney, I was probably most interested in that sort of Ripple Terraform progression and how they're applying the Howey test and the consistency of it. And what's really interesting is just you have these traditional securities laws and how you define a security, which the SEC with a lot of these tokens I think has a point that they are securities. Just the fact that they have a blockchain capability on top of sort of this equity-like setup doesn't shouldn't prevent them from giving investors the same protections they have otherwise. But then it gets a little murkier after that. There's a lot of gray areas. There's no legislation that deals directly with tokens and crypto in general, and so it's just one of those things where you have these decisions that are using kind of existing securities laws, but there's no additional ammunition or additional guidance that can be used to make clearer decisions. So I think until that comes, we're just going to have the same issues over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is moving forward, there's kind of a waning of just regulation by enforcement, and that we come to more of a standardization of process and clarity. I could be completely wrong. I have no idea, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are there.
I think that's right. I mean, you do have a lot of these industry participants. I think the fair criticism of the SEC is that the lack of outreach or really clamoring for some kind of guidance that they would comply with. And so if that's not provided, that part I think is fair. But everything's case by case. Then you have the ones where issuers are clearly, promoting something that would be a security in any other context, and it's not really like a get out of jail free card just because it's crypto. So you have to balance those two kind of competing issues and figure out the ones where there really is real pushback.
Yeah. So you're saying you have a lot to do then to keep your clients updated on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from our standpoint, it's really more of an issue, I think, for a lot of these issuers and exchanges. So if you're from the fund manager standpoint, all along we've really taken the position that it would be aggressive and probably irresponsible to assume that the underlying assets in the fund are not securities. Like a lot of, unless you're investing in just Bitcoin, for example, that's a big leap. And so we've, from the outset, advised our clients, assume you're dealing with securities. Everything else then is just, no different than it would be with a traditional hedge fund. Um, the documentation is different, the risk disclosures are different, the, you know, uh, service providers are in some contexts are different, but the securities laws aspects are the exact same. You have to comply with the Investment Company Act and be either a 3C1 or a 3C7 fund. You have to comply with the Advisors Act and either register with the SEC or a state or rely on an available exemption. And so, for fund managers that have been set up that way all along, I think their exposure is a little bit more limited. But for the issuers and the exchanges, it's obviously, potentially, um, just a huge deal and really impactful.
Totally agree. Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean that's it on my end. Anything else you guys want to talk about while we're here?
Anything you guys have been saying that you want to talk about?
I was
I
just
feel like
curious. I mean, you mentioned exchanges and that. Obviously, the banking side, from your client's point of view, is still a topic of conversation, right?
yeah, I would say that's putting it mildly. I mean,
Right.
for it's
Definitely.
a topic of frustration. It's a lot of these fund managers are having a difficult time opening bank accounts. Um, I think with the increased regulatory scrutiny, you see obviously some banks um, exiting the industry and others, that are being much more cautious, and that has been a challenge. There's certainly banks we work with that are great partners for our clients, but it's limited as far as the ones that are continuing to work with crypto.
Yeah, I would say just from what I've seen too, it's not even just crypto. I mean, Signature Bank covered all asset classes, right? So I
Yep.
think there's at least what I've seen, a push to have a backup bank, to open multiple accounts just in case something happens. I've had multiple conversations on that with clients for sure.
Yep. Same thing here. We had clients that were at Signature or at some of the other banks that failed, and it's a really stressful, difficult situation for an existing fund to kind of deal with that. And how do you process investor subscriptions and withdrawals? And yeah, before this, we didn't see as much conversation about having multiple custodians and a separate sort of a backup bank account, and now I think that's the whole landscape has shifted a bit.
Yeah, even some banks that are now maybe not taking as much, certain types of clients. I've seen that come up recently as well, where maybe they're kind of pulling back on
Yeah,
certain types of
and
strategies.
which makes sense. They're more conservative by nature, and so you've got
Right.
a sort of choppy industry overall, and then obviously like the added uncertainty and risk of crypto,
Right.
it's going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. Interesting times for everybody, for sure.
Yeah,
Never gets old. Well, Kevin, this has been great, man. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about Kyle Law?
sure. So you can find my firm, Cott Law Group, at www.cottlawgroup.com. My contact information is on there, or you can just always shoot me an email at kevin@cottlawgroup.com. And we're also on Twitter and LinkedIn and can be found there.
Outstanding. We
Awesome.
appreciate the time, Kevin. Great to have a
Yep.
conversation with
Thanks
you.
for the insights, Kevin.
Of course. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me back on.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and reach out if you're interested in starting a fund, whether it's a hedge fund, VC fund, whatever fund you're thinking. We could help you out, and let us know if there's any other topics that you'd like for us to cover. Thanks for watching.